Good evening and welcome to No Spin. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Sri Lanka is in the midst of an unprecedented political and economic crisis. And the once all-powerful Rajapaksa dynasty now finds itself the target of a wave of anger that has swept through the island nation. Both President Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe have offered to resign after protesters stormed their homes over the weekend. Even now, hundreds of protesters have occupied the presidential palace, making full use of the facilities including the gym, the swimming pool and even the presidential kitchen and bedrooms. They even set Mr. Wickremesinghe's house on fire over the weekend. Mr. Rajapaksa and Mr. Wickremesinghe have not been seen in public since Friday. In fact, there are reports that Mr. Rajapaksa has now been flown to a Sri Lankan air base earlier today. The country has been facing a steadily growing foreign exchange crisis as it basically ran out of money to buy essential commodities like food, fuel and medicines. People have for months now struggled for the most basic necessities, and anger against the establishment has grown. Sri Lanka is heavily dependent on imports, but bad policy decisions by the Rajapaksas coupled with COVID lockdowns that cut off tourism landed Sri Lanka in the mess that it is in today. It's hard to believe that the once all-powerful Rajapaksa family is today facing political oblivion. There are also many experts who believe that their over-dependency on Chinese loans has been another big factor in the crisis the country finds itself in today. Riding a nationalist wave in the wake of deadly terror attacks, Gotabaya Rajapaksa swept to power as president in 2019. His brother Mahinda Rajapaksa was already a hero amongst the majority Sinhalese in 2009 when his government defeated the LTTE after years of a bloody civil war. Gotabaya was defense secretary at the time. The Rajapaksas headed a government that was blatantly majoritarian, and the country's minorities bore the brunt of this. But today, that has not been enough to stave off the huge mass anger over the mismanagement of the economy. Joining us on NDTV now is India's former Foreign Secretary and former High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Nirupama Rao. Nirupama Rao, thank you very much for joining us. How do you read, this crisis in Sri Lanka? Did you ever imagine it would come to this point where the all-powerful Rajapaksas would be in this position?
Thank you, Nidhi, for having me on the show. I think the situation in Sri Lanka is entirely unprecedented. I don't believe anybody could have foretold the extraordinary turn of events that you've seen unfolding over the last few days. It's not just the bankruptcy of the Sri Lankan economy that we are witness to, but also the bankruptcy of the political leadership in the country, which has entirely failed the people. And you're witnessing on the streets the anger of hundreds and thousands of Sri Lankan men and women, people who have lost faith in the ability of a democratic government to deliver.
Well, I come back to the Rajapaksas in particular because, they've been an all-powerful political family that has dominated the political landscape of Sri Lanka for decades. And we saw, the kind of wave of nationalism that rode President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to power in 2019. Is there a lesson you think here for majoritarian governments overall that you can't, sort of continue to govern by majoritarianism alone? Ultimately, the economy will matter.
I think majoritarianism has been a curse that has afflicted Sri Lanka for many decades now. You saw it unfolding from the mid-1950s onwards with the implementation of the Sinhala-only policy, the division of ethnicities on the basis of language. So majoritarianism and the belief that the Sinhala race and people of Buddhist faith are destined to lead the country and everybody else should fall behind. That has been the bane of Sri Lanka's political, social and economic life for decades now. So it's not just a question of what Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa brought to bear after he became the president and won a landslide victory in the elections of 2019. This has been a problem with Sri Lanka for many decades now.
So what are the lessons from that then?
Well, I think the lessons from that are for democracies everywhere is that there should be respect for diversity, that the minorities have a voice, have their rights to be protected. And what happened in Sri Lanka was, even after the victory over separatist forces in the civil war ended in 2009, there was ample room, ample space and ample opportunity for the government of the day to provide not just rehabilitation but reconciliation. And that process never really got underway. The divisions continue, and minorities in the country continue to feel marginalized and underprivileged.
How do you see India's reaction, India being very cautious, saying that we stand with the people of Sri Lanka as they seek to realize their aspirations? You think, this is an opportunity for India as well, as it, lends Sri Lanka a helping hand?
Well, Nidhi, I think the situation in Sri Lanka is extremely dire and very, very serious. And India, as Sri Lanka's only neighbor, has obviously to sit up and take note. And I'm sure the policymakers in New Delhi are doing just that. So going beyond the statement that we issued yesterday and what we've been saying on the crisis, I believe that our policy-making machinery must be working overtime to see what solutions we can offer to Sri Lanka at this point, at this very tragic turn of events that we have seen unfolding in that country. We cannot afford Sri Lanka to go down. We cannot afford that Sri Lanka be a failed state. So India has literally to be the first responder at all times, in all terms, in all circumstances. And I think that is really what we have to accept. It's the burden that we have to shoulder, because Sri Lanka is too important for us strategically and as a neighbor to go down.
How much of the dependence on China for investment in infrastructure projects, etc., do you think was responsible for this economic crisis the country faces today? There seem to be very different opinions from experts on that, but this dependence on China, was that a key factor in your view? You've served as ambassador to China as well.
Well, going by the statistics, people say, the economists say that the burden of Chinese debt on Sri Lanka's overall debt is about 10 to 12%. But I think there are many hidden aspects to that which perhaps are not entirely revealed to the public eye. So the extent of Chinese involvement in Sri Lanka is extremely deep. We've seen that over the last decade or so. You saw what happened in Hambantota. So the impact on Sri Lanka's sovereignty and independence of action by the increase of Chinese influence in Sri Lanka is a reality that stares us very hard in the face today.
And finally, Nirupama Rao, it's not just Sri Lanka that is facing this economic instability and now political instability, but we're seeing it in Pakistan, we're seeing it in Nepal as well. How worried should we be that in our neighborhood we have this sort of instability at the moment?
Well, I think we should be extremely worried, and we should be intensely concerned about what is happening in our neighborhood. I've always been an advocate of closer integration with our neighbors in South Asia. And Pakistan, of course, we have very serious, deep-seated problems in that relationship. So I doubt we can do very much to help Pakistan at all at this stage or in the near and medium term. But when it comes to Nepal and Sri Lanka, I think we should be very, very alert, very, very cognizant of the risks that these countries face. And we should be prepared to unveil and work out a strategy that helps the people of both these countries. And I say particularly in regard to Sri Lanka, because food insecurity is staring at least 20% of the population of Sri Lanka in the face today. And something on the lines of what we do here in this country, employment guarantee scheme on the lines of Manrega, for instance, we should be thinking of doing for Sri Lanka. I know that normally that is not extended to countries beyond our borders, but Sri Lanka is a very special case.
All right, Nirupama Rao, thank you very much, ma'am, for your insights on that important story today as we continue to monitor the crisis in Sri Lanka closely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, for the last 3 days, we've seen hundreds of protesters literally sprawled across the presidential palace in Sri Lanka, using all the facilities there, whether it is the swimming pool, the gym, as I was saying earlier, the bedroom, the kitchen, and they're staying put until the president and the prime minister of the country actually step down and go. My colleague Shrija is there and sent us this report.
Probably never in the political history of Sri Lanka someone would have witnessed where, citizens, common man would have just breached the heavily guarded presidential palace to explore and catch a glimpse of what a luxury life Gotabaya Rajapaksa was actually living. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's presidential palace has become a tourist spot. This, of course, looks like a cupboard, but it is not one, because it opens and it leads to several floors, at least 2 floors down. Now, what we are going to do is just to show you like this, which the protesters have termed it as a secret bunker, but there is also a lift that operates through this particular secret bunker. As you just take these stairs to the ground floor, that is to the bottom floor, what we see is that there is one particular door that we spot. Now this, of course, which we understand, though the protesters have managed to break open several doors, managed to destroy several properties inside within the presidential palace, there is one which they could not, of course, dismantle or break open. That is this particular door that you see right here. What several of the protesters, of course, have questioned is what can Gotabaya Rajapaksa be hiding inside this particular door? What could be behind this particular door? Now that's the question, especially, quite a lot of citizens would like to know. From enjoying the swimming pool to, playing a piano and then attending press conferences of their own, of the citizens themselves. Now, clearly, the citizens are having a time inside a luxury life, which they call it, which once Gotabaya Rajapaksa had enjoyed in this very location. If I could go across to a few citizens, what do you make of this?
It's the power of the common people, undoubtedly, because it's the power. That's what made us come here, because normal people would never have access to places like this before. So it's all the power of the common people.
It's very proud. Now we showed the politicians they are here to govern us, for us to become better, not to use us for their lives. They just made their lives better and they pushed us to the brink. And we waited until we lost everything to realize that we have to take it back.
You have explored through the presidential palace. What did you see?
I saw that they are having a luxury life than us. Actually, we are leading a very poor life. So we saw that how they are living and how they have everything they have. So we don't have anything.
Some pretty incredible scenes being reported by Shrija there, where we have Wickremesinghe, former State Minister of Finance of Sri Lanka, Member of Parliament, joining us. Amjad Maulana is an activist and protester who's been at the forefront of the protests there. Neena Gopal, senior journalist, also joining us this evening. Thank you to all of you for being with us. Mr. Wickremesinghe, to you first, what is happening with the movement to form an interim government? When can we expect anything on that front?
As per the announcement of the Speaker, the President would vacate by Wednesday, and then there will be the constitutional process will be that nominations will be entertained in Parliament on Monday, and then immediately after that there could be a vote taken as to who could be the President or the acting President.
Do you know where the president is right now? There are all kinds of reports about him being on a Navy vessel and now being at an air base. Do you know where he is?
We have absolutely no idea as to where he is. It's very unfortunate that this situation has arisen when the struggle has been going on for months, and he has been told about it, and the consequences of it. I was there personally explaining this to him for more than 2.5 hours a month ago, you see, and saying that changes have to happen, and basically he needs to go. The powers of the executive presidency need to be curbed. Sri Lanka traditionally is a democracy, and the centralization of power will not work because the democratic principles are very rooted in the people of this country. But it all fell on deaf ears, and he tried ways and means of staying on. And so the inevitable has now happened.
Right. Amjad Maulana, you've been at the forefront of the protests there. Just tell us, what protesters are feeling, saying. Is there an overwhelming anger when you contrast the sort of luxurious life of the president compared to, the difficulties, for day-to-day existence that people have struggled with all these months?
Absolutely, Nidhi. I mean, it's been a whirlwind of emotions from the very beginning. I mean, this protest has been going on for the last 92 days, up until July 9th, when we overran the presidential palace. So what started off these protests was anger and frustration. And then what we saw on July 9th, when we were finally able to attain our objectives, was more jubilation and euphoria. And now, once we actually witnessed the lap of luxury, as you showed in your report just before we came on, it's gone back to anger and frustration. And we've had enough of these leaders basically leading us on a path that, that it is for their own benefit. So this is the pure reason why while we are angry and frustrated, we are also glad that we were able to showcase that sovereignty actually lies with the people. It does not lie with the politicians. It doesn't lie with certain families. It lies with the people of Sri Lanka.
But just describe to us what it was like to be at the presidential palace. What were the thoughts that ran through your mind and through those who were with you when you opened the doors?
Yeah, I mean, I was part of the first wave of protesters that broke in, for me personally, it was bittersweet. Bitter because I'm a big believer in democracy, and I'm a big believer in the fact that the system, however progressive and how much it should be changed, it should work. And the fact that we had to resort to actually storming the presidential palace to actually make our point, to get our point across, was actually very disappointing. But at the same time, it was also quite sweet as well, for the fact that we were actually able to attain our objectives. The power was able to be vested back to the people, and we were able to showcase the fact that this is in fact a democracy, and it is the people's power at the end of the day. And
so you're not moving from there. I mean, the protesters are not going to budge, right, until the president actually goes?
Absolutely not. We are going to stay put. Our goal is, from day one, it's been Gota, go home. Until Gota goes home, we will stay here. We will not go home.
Neena Gopal, how are you viewing these extraordinary events? And the question we're really asking on the program is whether there is a lesson for majoritarian governments everywhere, that majoritarianism alone is not enough to sustain you.
Thank you very much, Nidhi, for having me on your program. I enjoy it so much. But I do want to say this whole business about Gota, go home. I mean, where is this home of his? Is he going to escape now? If he's sitting in Katanayaka Air Base in an aircraft, which is, a Sri Lankan Air Force aircraft, he's going to fly out and he will not be held to account. He could escape. He could go to Dubai. He could go to the Maldives. I believe that's a very real possibility. Or he could go off to Uganda, where he has, allegedly, so many companies, which are run alongside, a man who shares a name, by the way, with Velupillai Prabhakaran. There's a Velupillai Kannanathan, that is the High Commissioner there, who, who's apparently in league with Gota. And I think the division in the family is also quite interesting. The fact that none of the others have joined him, that Mahinda is still in the country, and who will hold them to account? I mean, that's what fascinates me. And yes, you're right about majoritarian governments, stamping out dissent in the way they do, imposing a casino owner as the finance minister, as Gota did recently. It just shocks you. Why do they get away with why do these kind of leaders, firstly, how do they get voted to power in the first place? And secondly, why has no one questioned them for all these years? He was allowed to waive taxes which only benefited a few of his cronies. He was allowed to, he upset the Chinese, by the way. You asked Nirupama Rao this question. He actually got the Chinese in knickers in a twist, because he had their, their chemical fertilizers sitting in port. He refused to let it come out. So there is a lot that Gota is responsible for. Not just...
Nina Gopal, how do you see the geopolitics playing out here, given that Gotabaya Rajapaksa, really warmed up to the Chinese, much to India's horror? India now has gone out of its way to help in whatever way it can, and is, cautiously watching and continues to help in whatever way it can. Is there an opportunity here for India, you think? How do you think geopolitically this is going to play out in the region?
Well, I think China nibbling away at at the northern ports of Sri Lanka definitely upset India, and I think Gota and Mahinda both made amends. They did, of course, upset us further by cancelling the Colombo port terminal, but they gave us another terminal there. It is an opportunity for India. We do have we've managed to bring the Maldives a little bit back into our, sort of sphere. And yes, it's not that we want to control Sri Lanka. It's because it's the danger, I think, is stems from, if you also remember the Easter bomb blast, there were connections to ISIS-K, and there were sleeper cells in Coimbatore and Kerala, which did seem to have a connection with them. So that is a worry. I don't think we can ever, get away from that. So we need to ensure that we don't have a underbelly, which is a threat to us.
Right. Obviously for our own interests in the neighborhood, absolutely. Mr. Wickremesinghe, just on this point of majoritarian politics and how far it would take you, did you ever imagine that it would come to this for the Rajapaksas a couple of years ago when they were riding high?
Not a couple of years ago. Basically, I came into politics myself from being a banker, and basically seeing the rise of the Rajapaksa from being president to king, and basically questioning that right through. So I could see the deterioration coming in, but unfortunately through the election, they were overwhelmingly voted in by the public of the country. And so they rode on that, and today also as a result we have a distortion in parliament, which is not the sentiment in the country. The sentiment in the country is very different. We identify with the sentiment in the country, but in parliament it's a different story. Therefore we have a challenge. We need to transition through a democratic process. We need to transition holding up the rule of law, but we have to transition. So there is no question about it. And accountability is extremely important. We don't believe in violence, but accountability through the rule of law. Everyone who has basically stolen assets, we have to recover these assets. We have to hold politicians and officials responsible. They don't make asset liability declarations public. We have to do that. We have to make sure that the Commission on Investigating Bribery and Corruption is independent. These laws in 2019, when I was State Minister of Finance, were worked out there with the Attorney General. These have to be brought in immediately. And these laws need to be used, and the judicial process must be followed in bringing them to accountability.
Absolutely. Amjad Maulana, just to ask you that if there was one lesson you think the world should learn from Sri Lanka's crisis, which is far from over, what would that be? And are you worried that, even with a new government in place, it's not like things will be magically resolved overnight? So this is a long haul.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is a long haul. And I think even to actually bring about the short-term reforms that we need to desperately get our country back on track, we needed leaders that we can trust. Without trust, the people were not willing to actually even take the hit that was necessary to actually get our economy back on track. So I think in terms of actually what the world can learn from us, I think it's not the world, but world leaders that could learn from what's been going on in Sri Lanka is that always be accountable to your citizens, and also ensure that good governance prevails at all times. Otherwise, in all democracies, the power lies with the people.
All right, I have to leave it at there for the moment. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. We're observing the situation in Sri Lanka closely and we'll see how that plays out. Thanks very much for joining us. That's it for the moment. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.